My voice is a little bit shaky this morning. I've been likened to Rod Stewart already, and I'll take that. I'm also, for those of you who are visiting, I'm the guy whose haircut was being made fun of earlier on. I had a haircut a few weeks ago, and it was quite short, maybe shorter than people were used to. And I said to one of the other leaders of the church a couple of weeks ago, you know, I've had more feedback on that one haircut than I have on most of my sermons. And he said to me, well, the lesson to learn there, Dave, is obviously people like it when you keep it short. So, is Stuart in the building? Is Stuart in the house somewhere today? There you go, thank you, Stuart. So I shall endeavour to please you with what I say this morning in many ways, but including brevity. We, this term, have been looking at one section of the Bible, one book in the Bible. It's called James, and it's a letter written by a man called James, who was actually the little brother of Jesus, to a bunch of Christians in a bunch of different places who all shared certain challenges they were facing. And the title of our series going through this book has been Just Do It. Because what we've been trying to avoid is a Christian faith which is just all about believing things, all about knowing things, but it not impacting the way we live. Maybe you're visiting here this morning. Maybe you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. If that's you, then welcome. But there's one thing that maybe you might think about Christians, which is that we can be a little bit hypocritical. We can be people who believe something, but does it actually affect the way we live? We can be people who have all these grand ideas about ourselves and other people and God and the world, but do we actually become people who you like? So this series, we've been trying to spend some time thinking about what it is that the things that we believe actually need to look like in practice. James has some very strong words, and today the little passage we're going to be looking at has some fairly strong words. He is very, very blunt and very, very direct with people. We're going to be looking at two little passages which could seem quite disconnected from one another, but actually they come right after one another, and they're much more connected than you might think. There is a link. And the link really can be summed up in this question, which I'm asking you. Where does your security come from? Where does your security come from? What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel at ease? What makes you feel peaceful? Where is it that your security comes from? I want to read the first of the two little sections, and it's talking about rich people. It's talking about people who have lots of money and lots of wealth, people who are well off. Now, he speaks in quite negative ways about people who are rich. He speaks in very negative ways about these people who are well off. I don't want us to be confused, though, because I don't want us to read this and read it and assume that therefore he's saying to be rich is bad, to have stuff is wrong. I don't believe that's what's being said here at all. If James was writing to a community of people who all had blue eyes, and who were being mistreated by people who all had brown eyes, the letter that he would write would sound very, very, very disdainful of people with brown eyes. But it'd be wrong to take that and assume that therefore all people with brown eyes the world over are bad, are wrong, just for having brown eyes. They're wrong for the way they're using those brown eyes. So to take it back to the passage we're actually looking at, he's not talking about rich people are bad and it's bad to be rich. He's talking about the way that these particular people are using those riches. That's good and that's very well. I don't want that to be a let-off hook for us. I don't want that to be something that lets us off the hook and says, well, we couldn't possibly be rich people who are using our wealth wrongly. We couldn't possibly be mismanaging our resources. We couldn't possibly be guilty of the same things that these people are. We could be. You could be. You could fall into some of the same traps as these people here. And I want us to be alert and open to thinking about whether we might be. The Bible has lots of things to say about the way that we as Christians should live. It's all meant lovingly. It's all meant kindly. It's all meant to help us to examine our lives well and make sure that we are representing Jesus to the world as best we can. So let's dig into these words together. James chapter 5, starting at verse 1. It's on page 982 of the church Bibles, if you have one. James chapter 5, starting at verse 1, says this: "Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you." It's not a chirpy passage. "Your riches have rotted, and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure for the last days. Listen, the wages of the labourers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous one, who does not resist you. Now, those are quite strong words against people who are rich. I just want to be clear about that. But what is it actually about the way that they're using their riches and the way that they're using their wealth that is wrong? What is it that James is challenging? James is writing to quite a poor community of Christians. And there are these rich people around them who are mistreating them. James is ultimately trying to help them to understand how they can live in light of being attacked by these rich people and mistreated by these rich people. But James pauses for a moment to point out the error in the way that the rich people are living. And there are a number of things that he says about them. He starts off in the first couple of verses, first 3 verses, talking about how they've laid up more and more and more treasure for themselves. They've accumulated things. He talks about their riches, talks about clothes, talks about gold and silver. All of these things that they've accumulated, that they've got more and more and more of, but they're starting to rot, they're starting to be moth-eaten, they're starting to fade away. They've got all this stuff, but it's not being used for anything. They've got all this stuff, but it's just being stored up and kept and waiting, and it never has any purpose. They are getting more and more and more wealthy, but nothing's happening as a result. And he's saying that ultimately, these things will fade away. Ultimately, no matter how much stuff we've got, there'll be a day when we don't have it anymore. Either because we lose it, or because it becomes ineffective, or because it becomes outdated and defunct because a new, better thing comes along, which we then have to strive after that, or because one day we'll die, and we can't take it with us. One of the errors of these particular rich people is that they're getting all of this stuff, they're getting more and more and more and more and more, they're accumulating more and more and more stuff, but it's useless. It's pointless. It doesn't actually achieve anything in the end. The things we have are meant to be used. The things we have are not just a status symbol so that we can say, we've got more stuff, look at me. I've got a bigger house and I've got more cars and I've got more money. I've got more zeros after the numbers on my paycheck. For what end? For what purpose? James says that the rust of the silver and gold they've accumulated is actually evidence against them. That the fact that these things are achieving nothing is evidence against them. Because if they've been given something and entrusted something, they should be using it for good, not just keeping it for themselves. That's the first thing that he speaks about. The second thing is in verse 4. He talks about wealthy people who have labourers working in their fields, but they're fraudulently not giving these people the money that they deserve. They are wealthy, they're landowners, they're business owners, but they're not actually giving fair wages to the people who are working for them. They're getting all of this stuff, they're accumulating more for themselves, but the people who they could actually care for, they are not. Stuff is meant to be used, people are meant to be valued. And in both of these cases, they're falling short. James then carries on. Look in verse 5, you've lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You've fattened your hearts. He's talking about an exuberant, self-indulgent lifestyle. People who have all the latest mod cons, people who live in absolute comfort, people who have this, that and the other, people who are self-indulgent, who are all about creating more and more comfort and enjoyment and pleasure for themselves. And that in itself isn't wrong. There's nothing wrong with comfort, nothing wrong with pleasure, nothing wrong with enjoyment. But then it's followed by, but you have condemned and murdered righteous ones, or the righteous one, who doesn't resist you. Saying there is a difference between the way that you live yourselves and the way that you treat other people. What does it mean that they've murdered other people? I don't believe that James is actually saying that a rich person has gone up to a poor person and killed them. He's saying that because of the way that they live, because of their own self-indulgence, because of the exuberance of their lifestyle, and the money that they choose to pour into that, while not giving to others, while not blessing others, while not making sure that other people's wages are being paid fairly, means that other people become poor. And it's not news to any of us that in society the poor die more often than the rich. The poor die in greater numbers at younger ages. the way that we choose to live is not disconnected from the way that we ask other people to live. James is very clear about that. So in each of these areas, the people are failing to live well, getting more stuff for themselves but not using it, having workers but not treating them well, living a really self-indulgent lifestyle but not looking out for other people. And really, underneath all of these things, there's an attitude problem going on in the way that these people are approaching their riches. And I want to put it like this. We can either approach the things that we've got, the stuff we've got, the money in our bank, we can either approach those things as a scorecard or as an opportunity. Because the thing about money is that money can be given a very clear number. The things that we have can be counted. A lot of the things that we have, not everything. But whether it's the number at the bottom of our pay slip, whether it's the number that's at the bottom line of our bank statements, whether it's the whatever it is about, whether it's the amount that we've got saved in a pension fund, all of these things are figures. And when they're figures, they can be compared with somebody else's figures. So we can use them as a scorecard. I've got this number of zeros on my payslip or in my bank account. How many do you have? And we may not actually ask that question, but the way that we think of it is, I've got more, so I must be doing well. That is one way of approaching our money. We see it as a scorecard. Another way is to approach it as an opportunity. My payslip has this number of zeros, therefore I have more opportunity to bless people than someone else might do. It turns our thinking around, doesn't it? Maybe it's not just about the actual financial money, maybe it's our homes. Natalie and I live in a 3-bedroom home. We have 3 bedrooms. 3 is more than 1. 3 is also more than 2. 3 is less than any number that's bigger than 3. These are just numbers. Numbers in themselves doesn't matter. But if we had pride because we live in a 3-bedroom house and you only live in a 1-bedroom house, well, then we're using it as a scorecard. We must be doing better than you because we have more rooms in our home than you. Or we could say, we have 3 bedrooms. Well, we use one of them. That means we've got 2. What could we do with those? Who could we bless with those? Who could we invite in? Who, when we see that they're in need, do we say, come and stay with us? How do we host people? How do we bless our family? How do we bless our friends? How do we use those things instead of just saying, we're doing well because we've got a big house? Of course, you can scale that right the way up. If we've got a mansion, what about the opportunities that could be used there? But if we approach it as a scorecard, I'm doing well, then we're missing an opportunity. And really, at the bottom of each of the ways that these people in this passage are misbehaving or mistreating their wealth, it's that. Put it another way, it's the difference between I'm going to use it for me or I'm going to use it for good. I'm going to use the things I've got for me so that I can enjoy them, or I'm going to use the things that I've got for the good of others. That's the choice. And the rich people who are surrounding the people that James is writing to are making the wrong choices. The question is, for the community that James is writing to, who are mostly poor and who are Christians, how do they respond? Because James is desperate that they don't make the same mistake as these rich people. That they don't start to value these things in a way that they shouldn't. They don't start to treat their own wealth and the wealth of others as a scorecard. Because one of the temptations humanly to respond to this would be to start to resent these people. To start to say, well, I wish I had that as well, and they don't, and therefore I'm not going to like them, and therefore I'm going to resent them, and I'm going to hate them. Well, that wouldn't display Jesus' love to the world, would it? Because Jesus loves all people. Another response would be to sort of envy it and strive towards it. To say, well, clearly the way you get by in this world is to have more money, so I'm going to do whatever I can do to get that more money, to get the more stuff. But actually then, we end up making the same problem in our poverty that someone else might do in their riches. We end up still striving after the wrong things. We're just striving after something we don't have instead of striving after something we do. But it's still the wrong thing. We're still treating it as a scorecard rather than an opportunity. And the truth is that neither of those things will ever work, because there'll always be someone with more. There'll always be someone who's better off, someone with a bigger house, someone with more cars. So what do we do about it? Well, James carries on. Carries on with a sentence that includes the word therefore, so I know that it carries on. What James is about to say does in some way address what he's just been talking about. Verse 7, we carry on reading, and we hear, be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who showed endurance. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. James's response to the position these Christians find themselves in, being mistreated by people who have bad intentions, is not to say resent it, not to say strive after it, not to say envy it and want it for yourself. He asks them to turn their eyes to a bigger perspective. He asks them to be patient and to endure, because there is a much bigger story going on. I want to pause for a moment and say, if you take what I believe about God, what I believe about Jesus, the things that make me a Christian, if you take all of those things away, if those things aren't true, I actually have nothing to say about the lifestyle that I've just described. Because if this world is all there is, if the things that we have now and the lives that we live now is all that there is, and there is nothing beyond it and nothing outside of it, then why does it matter? Why does it matter how we use our wealth? Why does it matter whether we accumulate more stuff or don't? It's all going to fade away one day, so what's the point? I can't even tell you that I've got a particularly good justification for why you should treat other people well, why you should seek to look after people. If all you've got is this life, live it, enjoy it. Do whatever will happen to make you enjoy this life the most. The Bible actually says that itself in another part of the Bible called Ecclesiastes, which we're not going to go into today. But take God out of things. Life lived just here, I don't have anything to say whatsoever. But if there is a bigger story, if there is a bigger picture, if the things that I believe that make me a Christian are true, then there is a far better invitation to follow. James addresses this situation they find themselves in, not by pointing them to resentment or striving after it or aiming for it themselves. He calls them to patience. He talks about a farmer who's waiting for crops, knowing that rain needs to come, but he can't see the rain. That's what he talks about in verse 7. And he waits for the rain, the early rain and the late rain. He knows it will come. He just has to wait. He knows it will come. He just has to be patient. Instead of trying to create the rain for himself, he just needs to wait, because it will come. James says you also need to be patient. Strengthen your hearts. Get some resolve in you, because the Lord is coming back. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is God, that Jesus as God became a human being. We remember that at Christmas, don't we? That God became close to us by becoming one of us. We believe that he died to deal with all the wrong stuff that we do. We believe that he rose again, showing that life is more powerful than death. And we believe that one day Jesus will come back. Jesus will come back. And at that point, the only thing that will matter is not how many cars you got on the drive, not how big you are, not what band of council tax you pay, not what your pay slip is, not what your bank balance is. None of those things will matter. The only thing that will matter is, does he know you? And do you know him? That's what we believe. That one day, either when we die or if he comes back before we do, that will be the only thing that matters. And so, rather than saying to the people that he's writing to, strive after that money, get some wealth for yourself, build up a little bit of insurance for yourself, instead of saying all of those things, James just says to them, remember that Jesus is coming back, and wait. And actually, all of this other stuff pales into insignificance compared with it. He gives them a bigger perspective. This is not the end of the story. Yes, you're being mistreated. Yes, there are people who are living their lives in ways that are completely wrong, and you're feeling the effects of it. But it's not the end of the story. The suffering, the hardship you're facing now is temporary. And that's true, by the way, whether we're talking about financial insecurity, whether we're talking about relational insecurity, whether we're talking about sickness and ill health. This is not the end of the story. There is another chapter to come. There is something more in your story. The book is not finished. And we can take comfort in that. If we believe that this is true, there is something to look forward to. And I'm not just talking about wishful thinking and hope fulfillment. I'm saying that I believe this is true, that this is real. And because it is, we can take comfort in it. And so it comes back to that question I asked at the beginning. What is your security in? What makes you feel safe? Because for one group of people in this bit that we've looked at, it's their wealth and their resources and their money. And as a result, they're very reluctant to give it away, very reluctant to share it around, very reluctant to use it to bless other people because it's theirs. And if they give it away, then where's their security? They're giving away their comfort. They're giving away their security and their safety. And that's scary. And so they won't do it. For another group of people, their security and their safety comes from the fact that they know Jesus, that they know God, and that they know God is coming for them, whether they're penniless or whether they're billionaires. So where is your security and safety? Is it in things that are fading away? Is it in things that might not last? I know that in some ways, mine can be. Because I'll be honest, I read this passage, and there are things about it that I go, ooh, that's a little bit like looking into a mirror. There are things that I am really reluctant to give away, to use. There are things that if I lose them, I don't know where I'm going to be standing or what I'm going to be standing on. But I'm also inspired as I read these words to remember that there is a bigger story, that there is something more to come. So there's a choice. There's a choice we all face to accept that what we can see around us is all there is. And if we do, then yes, strive for it, seek for it, get more of it, enjoy it while it lasts. Or we can accept that there's something bigger. We can live a life that says, there's something beyond this, something more than I have. And it might be that this morning, for those of you who are Christians, because ultimately the Bible never tells someone who's not a Christian how to live. Jesus never does it. I'm never going to. But there is, for those of us who are Christians this morning, a real challenge to examine our wealth, to examine the things that we've got and to say, am I actually using these things as a scorecard? Am I using these things so that I can either compare myself with other people or compare myself with myself from a year ago? Last year I had this much in savings, now I've got this, therefore I must be doing well. Do we need to flip around the scorecard? Do we need to say, last year I was able to give this amount to other people, this year I can do this? Because once we start to do that, we realize something that is so releasing, which is that actually it's not about the amount that we have that we can do something with, it's all about the heart that we have. Whether we have loads or whether we have little. Because what I don't want to be heard today is that the gospel of Jesus is get rich so you can give lots away. That's not what Jesus calls us to. He says, whatever you have, whatever I have entrusted to you, use it well. Use it generously. Use it kindly. If it's a penny, use it well. If it's a billion, use it well. In the booklet that accompanies this series, for those of you who've been following through it, on the very last page, this is the last week in our series on James, there's a section called Just Do It with some suggestions of things that you could do. And one of the things that we've suggested is to ask, what is it that you invest in? To think through your spending, the way you use your time, and how your thought life looks. Note down what you think they show about your priorities and your heart's desire. And as you do, ask God to reveal something to you of your priorities. What might change in your life if we were willing to regularly do that? What might change in our church family if we examined our priorities? Where are you letting money be the thing that you are striving for? because it's what the world teaches us to do. I'm going to ask that God would reveal that to us, because I desperately want us to be a church that looks more and more like Jesus. I said at the beginning that sometimes we can look like hypocrites. It's because sometimes we are. Sometimes we don't live out what we say we believe. Yeah, I trust Jesus for everything, but I also trust my bank balance a little bit more. Sometimes we can be guilty of that. I'm going to pray that he would challenge us. If you'd like to join in with that plea that God would challenge us by his Spirit, then you can say amen at the end, as I invite the band to come on back up and lead us again. Father God, I want to thank you that you love us exactly as we are, but you also love us enough not to want to leave us that way. I want to thank you for the areas of my life as I've been preparing for this that you have been exposing to me. And I want to ask that you would do that for each of us, that you would challenge us, that you would inspire us, that you would help us to remember the chapter that is coming, not just the chapter we're living in now. Help us to examine our ways. Shine a light on us, I pray. In Jesus' name I ask. Amen.